Finally, Mom's last party.
The morning light filtered through the tall windows of my Beacon Hill apartment, casting long shadows across the antique Persian rug. I watched dust particles dance in the sunbeams as I sipped my Earl Grey, the newspaper untouched beside me. Today marked my 67th year on this earth, though few would remember. Certainly not my children. I am Cordelia Ravenscroft, once heralded as one of the most promising conductors of my generation, before I became simply Mrs. Magnus Ravenscroft, the woman behind the great man, the supportive wife of the legendary maestro who conducted symphonies from New York to Berlin, Tokyo to Sydney. For 43 years, I stood in his shadow, my own baton gradually collecting dust in its velvet case. 3 years had passed since Magnus collapsed during a rehearsal of Mahler's Fifth with the Boston Symphony Orchestra. The irony wasn't lost on me that it happened during the Adagietto, that haunting movement about love. Love, what a complicated thing it had been between us. The phone rang, pulling me from my reverie. I let it ring 3 times before answering, a small rebellion against the immediate availability everyone now seemed to expect. Mother? It's Sybil. You weren't answering your cell. I hadn't bothered to check it. Good morning, Sybil. We've been planning for weeks. Thad has already contacted the caterers. You haven't forgotten about tonight, have you? How could I forget? My children suddenly organizing an elaborate birthday celebration after years of perfunctory phone calls and obligatory holiday appearances. The timing coincided suspiciously with Thaddeus's latest venture, a boutique record label specializing in reimagined classics that needed substantial financial backing. And Sybil's gallery was featuring a new controversial artist whose exhibition required more funding than expected. I remember, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. 7 o'clock. 6:30, she corrected with that impatient edge I'd grown accustomed to. The guests are arriving at 7. You'll need to be ready. Wear something elegant. That navy Dior would be perfect. I was being styled for my own birthday party. How fitting. Will you need anything else from me, Sybil? The slight pause told me she detected the subtle frost in my voice. Just be there, Mother. This is important. She hung up without saying goodbye. I placed the phone down and stared at the portrait of Magnus hanging above the marble fireplace. His penetrating gaze seemed to follow me around the room, just as his presence had dominated my life. The celebrated Magnus Ravenscroft, whose biography mentioned me only 17 times in 400 pages. I moved to my dressing table and opened the small drawer that contained the letter from Massachusetts General Hospital. The symptoms I'd been experiencing for months, the shortness of breath, the occasional chest pains, had a name now: severe aortic stenosis. A valve in my heart was narrowing, restricting blood flow. The procedure they recommended was complex, but offered good outcomes for someone in otherwise excellent health. My children didn't know. I hadn't told them about the diagnosis or the scheduled consultation next week. They had already been circling like elegant vultures since their father died. After overhearing Thaddeus on the phone discussing Mother's eventual estate, a month after the funeral, I'd developed a certain wariness about sharing health information. The intercom buzzed, Zara arriving for our morning meeting. My assistant of 15 years was the closest thing to family I had these days, though I'd never admit that aloud. Good morning, Mrs. Ravenscroft, Zara said as she entered, tablet in hand, her efficient manner a comforting constant in my life. Happy birthday. Thank you, Zara. And please, how many times must I ask you to call me Cordelia? She smiled, but didn't respond to that familiar request. Dr. Winter called. She's confirmed for lunch at Mistral tomorrow. And the Boston Philharmonic has reached out again about the winter guest conductor position. I waved my hand dismissively. Tell them I'm considering other offers. There weren't any, but pride has always been my most faithful companion. And Mr. Thornfield sent these, Zara added, nodding toward the entryway where a striking arrangement of unusual flowers sat. Not roses or lilies, but native New England wildflowers, artfully composed to appear both wild and deliberate. Ezra's signature style. Ezra Thornfield had entered my life 6 months ago when the Symphony Board appointed him to redesign the gardens surrounding Symphony Hall. We'd found ourselves in conversation about Debussy during a fundraiser, and he'd actually listened instead of waiting for his turn to speak. A novel experience for me these days. Will Mr. Thornfield be attending tonight? Zara asked, her expression carefully neutral. I didn't invite him. The words came out more sharply than intended. The truth was, I hadn't wanted Ezra to witness the performance my children would inevitably put on, the devoted son and daughter celebrating their beloved mother. A fiction we all participated in for reasons I was beginning to question. After Zara left with her usual efficiency, I stood before my closet, bypassing the navy Dior that Sybil had suggested. Instead, I selected the crimson Valentino I'd purchased in Milan, but never worn. Magnus had disapproved of the color, saying it drew too much attention. Precisely why I bought it. The day passed with the slowness that seems reserved for occasions one is dreading. By 6 o'clock, the caterers had transformed my apartment into a showcase of wealth and taste. Crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier. White roses, never my favorite, but Magnus had preferred them, adorned every surface. The menu featured delicacies I barely cared for, but that would impress the right people. I dressed methodically, fastening my grandmother's pearls around my neck and slipping on the diamond earrings Magnus had given me for our 30th anniversary. A year I later discovered he'd been involved with a young violinist in his orchestra. At precisely 6:30, Sybil and her husband Winston arrived, followed minutes later by Thaddeus. My daughter air-kissed my cheeks, careful not to smudge her immaculate makeup. "Mother, you look spectacular," she said, her eyes quickly assessing the Valentino with a flicker of annoyance. "Though we did discuss the Navy. I felt like something brighter tonight," I replied, watching her exchange glances with Thaddeus. My son embraced me with his usual theatrical affection. The lady of the hour. 67 never looked so good. He stepped back, champagne already in hand. "You've outdone yourself with this spread. I believe the credit goes to your caterers," I reminded him. "Details, details," he waved dismissively. "The important thing is celebrating you." The guests began arriving, board members from the symphony, former colleagues of Magnus, a few distant relatives, and Boston's cultural elite. People who sent Christmas cards but never called. People who had attended Magnus's funeral and commented on what a supportive wife I'd been. The evening progressed predictably. Conversations about recent galas, charitable contributions, someone's child accepted to an Ivy League school. I moved through my own party like a ghost, smiling and nodding at appropriate intervals. No one asked about my conducting. No one mentioned the articles published decades ago that had predicted my promising career. "Quite the celebration," came a voice at my elbow. Octavia Winter, elegant as always in simple black, her silver hair swept into a chignon. "Octavia, I didn't think you'd come." Our relationship had evolved from bitter rivals to unlikely confidants after Magnus's death, when she'd revealed things about my husband I wished I could unhear. "And miss this performance?" She nodded toward Sybil, who was charming a potential investor for her gallery. "The devoted daughter act is particularly compelling tonight." I allowed myself a small smile. Octavia was the only person who saw through the facade my family had constructed. "They've gone to considerable expense," I murmured. "Indeed, one might wonder why." Her eyes, sharp as ever, studied my face. "You look tired, Cordelia." "It's nothing." The lie came automatically. "It's never nothing with you." She lowered her voice. "Have you told them about the heart condition?" I shot her a warning glance. "Not yet. They should know." "Why? So they can start measuring for drapes in this apartment? Begin cataloging the Stradivarius for auction?" Octavia didn't contradict me. She'd witnessed firsthand how quickly Thaddeus had inquired about his father's collection of rare conductor's batons after the funeral. As the evening wore on, I felt increasingly disconnected from the celebration supposedly in my honor. No one here knew me, not really. They knew Magnus Ravenscroft's widow, a footnote in the great maestro's story. I slipped away to the terrace for air, the spring night unusually warm. Through the French doors, I could see the party continuing without me, no one noticing my absence. The city lights sparkled below, the Charles River a dark ribbon weaving through Boston. I was contemplating whether anyone would miss me if I simply disappeared into my bedroom, when voices drifted from the far corner of the terrace. My children, partially concealed by a large potted topiary, champagne flutes in hand. "To Mother's last birthday party," Thaddeus was saying, his voice carrying on the night air. Sybil clinked her glass against his. "And to the future that awaits us when she's gone." I froze, my hand gripping the stone balustrade. "The old girl looks tired tonight," my son continued. "Dr. Harrison mentioned something about her heart last time I picked up her prescriptions." So he'd been speaking to my physician. A violation that should have infuriated me, but only left me numb. "How long do you think?" Sybil asked, and I couldn't mistake the calculating tone in her voice. "A year? Maybe less. These things accelerate quickly at her age." My daughter sighed. "Well, we'll need to be patient a little longer. Though I've already spoken to Christie's about some of the artwork. Preliminary valuations only, of course." "Of course?" Thaddeus chuckled. "I've been doing the same with that Stradivarius. 8 million, conservatively. And her investment portfolio is easily twice that. The real estate alone," Sybil added. "This apartment, the Cape House, the cottage in the Berkshires. All that careful planning Father did with the trusts works in our favor. Once she's gone, it bypasses probate completely." They continued, dividing my possessions, my life's accumulation, while I stood mere feet away, invisible as I'd always been. The shock gave way to something colder, harder, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I thought of the consultation scheduled next week, the procedure that could extend my life by decades, the children who were already spending their inheritance, the husband who had overshadowed me for my entire adult life. A sound escaped me, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob, and they turned, faces freezing in identical masks of horror as they realized I'd heard everything. "Mother," Thaddeus recovered first, his smile too bright. "We were just coming to find you. Time for the toast." I looked at my son, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in years. The weak chin he'd inherited from Magnus's father, the calculating eyes that had never shown genuine warmth. "By all means," I said, my voice steady. "Let's have a toast." They exchanged panicked glances, following me back inside like guilty children. The party paused as Thaddeus clinked a spoon against his crystal flute, calling for attention. The room quieted as he launched into a practiced speech about his extraordinary mother and her selfless devotion. I watched him perform, noting the practiced gestures, the artificial emotion. I saw Sybil dabbing at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. I observed the guests nodding appreciatively at this display of filial affection. All my life, I had been an audience member in my own story, the dutiful wife watching from the wings as Magnus took center stage, the mother whose children performed affection when it served their purposes, the conductor who never got to lead the orchestra. As applause rippled through the room, a decision crystallized within me. My children had just orchestrated their own disinheritance, though they didn't know it yet. Tomorrow I would call my attorney. The day after, I would meet with my doctor about scheduling the heart procedure. For the first time in decades, I felt the stirring of something I'd almost forgotten. The exhilaration of taking up the baton, of stepping onto the podium, of preparing to conduct. I raised my glass and smiled. "To new beginnings," I said. No one in the room understood that I wasn't toasting the past year. I was declaring war. I've always believed that revenge, like a fine symphony, should unfold with precision, each movement building upon the last until it reaches a devastating crescendo. The morning after my birthday party, I awoke with unusual clarity. The words of my children echoed in my mind, not as a painful reminder, but as fuel for the fire now burning within me. The house was quiet, the debris from last night's celebration already cleared by the cleaning service that Zara had arranged. I moved to the bay window overlooking the public garden, watching joggers navigate the pathways as the early morning light gilded the treetops. For decades, I had observed life rather than participated in it. That would change today. My first call was to Harold Blackwell, my attorney for the past 30 years. Unlike many in my circle, Harold had always addressed me directly during meetings, even when Magnus was alive. He answered on the second ring. "Cordelia, what a pleasure. I trust your birthday celebration was everything you hoped for." "It was illuminating," I replied. "I need to see you today. It's about my will." There was a brief pause. Harold knew that the Ravenscroft estate was substantial. The apartment alone was valued at nearly $12 million, not counting the properties in Cape Cod and the Berkshires, the art collection, Magnus's instruments, and the investment portfolio that had grown steadily over decades. "I can clear my schedule at 11, he said finally. "Perfect." And Harold? This meeting stays between us. After hanging up, I opened my jewelry box and removed the false bottom, retrieving a small key. In my closet, behind rows of designer clothes I rarely wore, was a safe that not even my children knew about. Inside were documents Magnus never wanted me to find, evidence of his affairs, financial transactions he'd hidden, and most importantly, the original contract I'd signed with the Berlin Philharmonic 40 years ago. Before meeting Magnus, I had been offered the position of associate conductor, a remarkable achievement for a woman in the 1980s. He had convinced me to decline, arguing that Berlin would destroy me, that the classical music establishment wasn't ready for a female conductor. What a convenient truth that had been. 3 weeks after I sent my regretful refusal, Magnus was invited as a guest conductor for their winter season. I placed these papers in my leather portfolio. They weren't relevant to today's meeting, but carrying them felt symbolic, a reminder of what had been taken from me and what I refused to relinquish now. Zara arrived at 9, her expression carefully neutral as she set down her tablet. She never mentioned the party, but her eyes held a question. "I'll be meeting with Harold Blackwell at 11, I informed her, "and I'd like you to schedule an appointment with Dr. Morrison about the heart procedure." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "You've decided to move forward with it?" "Yes, as soon as possible." She nodded, making a note. "Will you be informing Mr. Thaddeus and Miss Sybil about the surgery?" "Not yet." I looked directly at her. "Zara, you've been with me for 15 years. In that time, you've shown more loyalty than my own children." She appeared momentarily uncomfortable with the personal nature of this conversation, but remained silent, waiting. "I'm making changes to my will today. Significant changes. I would appreciate your discretion." "Of course, Mrs. Ravenscroft." Her professional demeanor never wavered, but I detected a hint of approval in her eyes. "And Zara, please call Octavia. Ask if she can meet me for dinner tonight instead of lunch tomorrow. Somewhere private." After she left to make the arrangements, I spent an hour at my piano, playing Chopin's nocturnes, with more passion than I had allowed myself to feel in years. The music had always been my true voice, even when circumstances forced me into silence. Harold Blackwell's office occupied the top floor of a brownstone on Commonwealth Avenue, its windows overlooking the tree-lined boulevard. He greeted me warmly, ushering me into his private office, where Boston's elite had planned their estates for generations. "Before we begin," I said, settling into a leather chair, "I need to know something. Who is the executor of my current will?" Harold consulted a file. "That would be Thaddeus. You and Magnus selected him during our last revision 3 years ago, shortly before Magnus passed." "Of course we had." Magnus had always favored Thaddeus, seeing in our son a more malleable version of himself. Sybil had been too independent for his taste. "I want to change that immediately. Neither of my children is to serve as executor." If Harold was surprised, he didn't show it. "Who would you prefer instead?" "You, Harold, and as co-executor, Zara Kincaid." Now he did look surprised. "Your assistant?" "My most trusted confidant," I corrected. "She knows more about my affairs than anyone." Harold made notes, his fountain pen scratching softly against the paper. "And what other changes did you have in mind?" I spent the next hour outlining my new wishes. The Beacon Hill apartment and Cape House would be sold, proceeds going to a foundation I wanted to establish. The Berkshires cottage would go to Octavia, who had always loved it. My investments would be liquidated and divided between the foundation and several smaller bequests to people who had shown me genuine kindness. "And your children?" Harold asked finally. I had considered this carefully. Complete disinheritance would lead to legal challenges, prolonged battles that would drain the estate and distract from my true purposes. "Thaddeus and Sybil will each receive $500,000, I said, "and the personal items listed here." I handed him a carefully prepared document that allocated specific possessions, enough to appear generous to an outside observer, but a fraction of what they expected. "The Stradivarius?" he asked, noting its absence from either list. "To the Boston Conservatory, with the stipulation it be used by promising female musicians." Harold set down his pen. "Cordelia, while I understand this is your decision, I must advise you that such dramatic changes, particularly so asymmetrical in nature, may be contested after your passing." I'm aware. May I ask what prompted this revision? I met his gaze steadily. Let's just say I've recently gained clarity about what matters to me. And who? He nodded, not pressing further. I'll have the documents prepared by the end of the week. In the meantime, I'd suggest not discussing these changes with family members until everything is finalized. That won't be a problem, I assured him. As I left Harold's office, my phone chimed with a message from Sybil. Lunch next week? There's an investment opportunity I'd like to discuss. I didn't respond. The remainder of the afternoon passed in a blur of practical matters. Dr. Morrison's office scheduled my valve replacement for the following month. I met with my financial advisor to discuss transferring certain assets into accounts solely in my name, a precaution against the eventuality that Thaddeus might try to assert control over my finances if my health appeared to deteriorate. By evening, I felt lighter than I had in years, as if shedding the weight of expectations that had bound me to a life I never truly wanted. Octavia was waiting at a private dining room at L'Espalier, a glass of Bordeaux already poured for each of us. You look different, she said, as I took my seat. Something's changed. I didn't answer immediately, taking a sip of wine instead. Octavia and I had a complicated history. For years we'd been rivals, both promising conductors, both vying for recognition in a field dominated by men. Then she'd chosen the violin instead, becoming one of the most celebrated soloists in the world while I disappeared into Magnus's shadow. I had resented her success until the truth emerged after his death. He had systematically undermined my career while advancing hers, creating an artificial rivalry to keep us both distracted. I heard them, I said finally. Thaddeus and Sybil, at the party. They were discussing my death, making plans for my possessions. Octavia's expression darkened. I'm sorry, Cordelia, though I can't say I'm surprised. Neither was I. Not really. I traced the rim of my glass. I changed my will today. Her eyebrows rose. Dramatically, I assume. They'll receive enough to avoid successful legal challenges. Nothing more. She nodded slowly. Good. And the heart surgery? Scheduled for next month. A smile spread across her face. Also good. But there's something else, isn't there? This isn't just about punishing them. I had forgotten how well she could read me. The Vienna Philharmonic called last week. They want me to conduct their spring series. Octavia set down her glass. Cordelia, that's extraordinary. It was. The Vienna Philharmonic had been one of the last major orchestras to accept female conductors. To be invited now, at 67, was unprecedented. I haven't given them an answer. Why not? This is what you've always wanted. I looked away. Is it? I've spent so long being defined by others, as Magnus's wife, as Thaddeus and Sybil's mother. I'm not sure I remember who Cordelia Ravenscroft is when she stands alone. Octavia reached across the table and took my hand, a gesture so unexpected that I nearly pulled away. Then find out. What do you have to lose? What indeed? My reputation? My children's approval? These things seemed increasingly meaningless. There's more, I admitted. I'm establishing a foundation for female conductors and composers. I'm calling it the Harmonic Ascendance Foundation, using the Ravenscroft name and fortune to support women in classical music. Octavia laughed. Magnus must be rolling in his grave. Let him, I said, surprising myself with the vehemence in my voice. He took enough from me, from us. The waiter arrived with our first course, momentarily halting our conversation. When we were alone again, Octavia fixed me with her penetrating gaze. What about Ezra Thornfield? I noticed he wasn't at your party. The mention of Ezra sent an unexpected warmth through me. Our connection had been growing steadily over recent months. Conversations about music and art that extended for hours, walks through the gardens he'd designed, a comfortable silence that never needed filling. I didn't invite him. I didn't want him to see that performance. Wise, she nodded. He strikes me as someone who values authenticity. He's asked me to accompany him to Tanglewood next weekend, for the opening of the summer season. And? I haven't answered him either. Octavia sighed dramatically. Cordelia, for a brilliant woman, you can be remarkably obtuse. Say yes to Vienna. Say yes to Ezra. Say yes to yourself, for once. Her words stayed with me long after dinner, following me home to my quiet apartment. I moved through the rooms, seeing them with new eyes. So many objects chosen by Magnus. The heavy Baroque furniture, the ornate frames, the dark draperies that kept the sunlight at bay. So little of me was visible in this space where I'd lived for decades. My phone rang as I was preparing for bed. Thaddeus. I let it go to voicemail, listening as he left a message about a pressing financial matter that required my immediate attention. No mention of last night's overheard conversation. No acknowledgement of the pain his words had caused. I deleted the message and turned off my phone. In bed, I found myself thinking about Vienna. About standing on that podium, baton in hand, commanding one of the world's greatest orchestras through Beethoven's Seventh. My interpretation, my vision, my triumph. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Sleep eluded me. At 2 a.m, I rose and went to the music room. Magnus's study had been converted after his death, the imposing desk replaced with my piano, his awards and accolades stored away. I sat at the Steinway, running my fingers over the keys without pressing them. A memory surfaced, my graduation recital at Juilliard, before I'd met Magnus. I'd conducted Tchaikovsky's Sixth Symphony, drawing praise from even the most critical faculty members. The dean had called my interpretation revolutionary and predicted a brilliant future. 6 months later, I met Magnus at a benefit in New York. Within a year, I was his wife, my conducting ambitions gently but persistently redirected toward supporting his career. I began to play softly, Debussy's Clair de Lune, flowing from my fingers in the darkened room. As the delicate notes filled the space, I made 2 decisions. First, I would accept Vienna's invitation. I would stand on that podium and show the world and myself what Cordelia Ravenscroft could do. Second, I would call Ezra in the morning and accept his invitation to Tanglewood. For too long, I had been defining myself by what I had lost. It was time to discover what I might still find. The next morning, the first call came from Sybil, her voice tight with poorly concealed anxiety. "Mother, Thaddeus tells me you're not returning his calls. He has some important matters to discuss." "I'm sure he does," I replied evenly. "We were thinking we should have a family dinner this week to follow up on your birthday celebration." I could almost see her, perfectly manicured nails, designer outfit, the practiced concern that never quite reached her eyes. "I'm afraid I'll be quite busy for the foreseeable future," I told her. "I'm preparing to conduct the Vienna Philharmonic this spring." The silence that followed was deeply satisfying. "Vienna? But you haven't conducted professionally in decades." 39 years, I confirmed. "It's time to end that particular intermission, don't you think? But your health is my concern, not yours." I kept my tone mild, refusing to give her the emotional response she was seeking. "I'll let you know when my schedule opens up." I ended the call before she could respond, then immediately phoned the contact at the Vienna Philharmonic. After confirming my acceptance, I called Ezra. "Tanglewood sounds lovely," I told him. "I'd be delighted to join you." His warm response kindled something in me that had been dormant for too long. The war I had declared at my birthday party was just beginning, but for the first time in decades, I was composing my own symphony, and its opening movement sounded glorious. The weeks following my decision unfolded like an accelerando, each day faster and more intense than the last. I had forgotten the exhilaration of purpose, the thrill of orchestrating my own destiny rather than merely accompanying someone else's. My revised will was signed and notarized 3 days after my meeting with Harold. The documents now rested in the safe behind my closet, alongside the evidence of Magnus's betrayals. Harold had raised one eyebrow when I insisted on keeping a copy in my possession, but I had learned the hard way that trusting others with my security was a risk I could no longer afford. Thaddeus called 17 times in the week after my conversation with Sybil. I answered none of his calls. Sybil's approach was more strategic. Emails about gallery events I might enjoy, text messages about her children's achievements, casual references to financial concerns that grew increasingly less casual as my silence persisted. I was not being cruel. I was being calculated. Every unanswered call, every ignored message strengthened my resolve, reminding me of the years they had treated me as an accessory to their lives rather than its center. The weekend at Tanglewood with Ezra arrived like the gentle lifting of a veil. We drove from Boston on a Friday afternoon. the Berkshires welcoming us with rolling hills clothed in summer green. Ezra's vintage Mercedes convertible hummed along winding roads as we discussed everything from Bernstein's controversial tempo choices to the therapeutic effects of Japanese garden design. "You seem different," he observed as we passed through a small town with a white steepled church. "More present?" I offered. He smiled. "I was going to say formidable, but present works too." Formidable. No one had described me that way in decades. Magnus had used supportive, elegant, appropriate, never formidable. Our accommodations were at Wheatley, the Italian-style mansion converted into a luxury hotel. Ezra had reserved separate rooms, a gentleman's gesture I appreciated even as I wondered if I might regret it. At 67, I found myself contemplating possibilities I had long ago abandoned. That evening, beneath the soaring roof of the Kusevitsky music shed, I experienced the Boston Symphony Orchestra not as the widow of a celebrated conductor, but as a conductor in my own right, analyzing choices, considering alternatives, mentally reshaping phrases that didn't match my interpretation. Ezra noticed my fingers subtly moving, conducting from my seat. "You're itching to be up there," he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. I didn't deny it. I've spent too long in the audience. The following morning, we walked through the gardens Ezra had helped redesign years earlier. He pointed out the integration of Eastern and Western elements, the careful balance of open space and intimate enclosures. The Japanese concept of ema, the space between things, is essential to both garden design and music, he explained. The silence between notes is as important as the notes themselves. The pause makes the subsequent sound more meaningful, I agreed. Magnus never understood that. He rushed through rests, afraid of losing the audience's attention. And you? I believe in trusting the composer. If Mahler wanted 3 beats of silence, who am I to reduce it to 2? We stopped beside a small stream where water flowed over carefully arranged stones. The gentle sound created a perfect counterpoint to the birdsong above. "Your heart surgery," Ezra said, his voice carefully neutral. "When is it scheduled?" I had told him about my condition the previous evening after the concert. Unlike my children, he had asked questions about my well-being, not my estate. 3 weeks from Tuesday. I kept my tone matter-of-fact. The procedure has a high success rate. I should recover fully within a month or 2. Just in time for Vienna. That's the plan. He turned to face me, his expression serious. "Is there anything you need? Anyone to stay with you after the hospital?" The question caught me off guard. For so long, I had been the caretaker, never the one cared for. Even when Magnus was ill, my role had been to manage his affairs, coordinate with doctors, shield him from stress, not to receive comfort myself. "Zara will handle the practical matters," I said finally. "She's very efficient." That's not what I asked Cordelia. The use of my name, not Mrs. Ravenscroft, not Maestro, just Cordelia, created a moment of unexpected intimacy. In the dappled sunlight of the garden, surrounded by the evidence of Ezra's artistic vision, I allowed myself to consider what it might be like to be vulnerable with someone again. "I don't know what I need," I admitted. "I've spent so long being self-sufficient that I'm not sure I remember how to accept help." Ezra nodded, not filling the silence with platitudes or reassurances. He understood the value of space, of ma. "When you do know," he said finally, "I hope you'll tell me." The remainder of the weekend passed in a haze of music, conversation, and leisurely meals. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, I felt myself relaxing into the moment rather than calculating its impact on some future goal. By Sunday evening, when Ezra drove me back to Boston, something had shifted between us. Not a dramatic declaration, but a quiet understanding that possibilities existed. He walked me to my door, declining my invitation for a nightcap with a rueful smile. "I have an early meeting tomorrow with the conservatory board," he explained, "but I'd like to see you again, soon." "I'd like that too," I said, surprised by the truth in my words. His kiss was brief, a gentle pressure against my cheek, yet it lingered in my mind long after he'd gone. The harsh reality of my situation reasserted itself the following morning when Thaddeus appeared at my door unannounced. Zara, who had arrived early to review my schedule for the week, intercepted him in the foyer. "Mr. Ravenscroft, your mother is not available this morning. If you'd like to make an appointment," "This is ridiculous," he interrupted, his voice carrying clearly to where I stood in my study. "She's my mother. I don't need an appointment." I stepped into the hallway. "It's all right, Zara." Thaddeus brushed past my assistant, his expensive cologne arriving before he did. He had always been handsome in the conventional way that opened doors in the world of finance: strong jaw, confident posture, the calculated dishevelment of someone who could afford to appear casual. "Mother," he began, not bothering with pleasantries, "I've been trying to reach you for weeks." "I've been busy." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Too busy for your son?" "What do you need, Thaddeus?" The directness of my question seemed to throw him. He glanced at Zara, who remained pointedly in the room, tablet in hand. "Could we speak privately?" "Zara stays," I said firmly. "Whatever you have to say can be said in front of her." He exhaled sharply, adjusting his strategy. "Fine. I've been approached about an investment opportunity, a new recording technology that could revolutionize the industry. The venture capital firm requires significant upfront capital, but the potential returns are extraordinary. And you'd like me to invest?" "It's not just for me," he said, the wounded tone not quite reaching his eyes. "It's a family opportunity. Your name, the Ravenscroft legacy, would open doors that would benefit all of us." I studied my son, wondering when he had become this person, or if he had always been this way and I had simply refused to see it. "How much?" He named a figure that would have represented a substantial portion of my liquid assets. Not so much that I couldn't afford it, but enough to significantly impact my plans for the foundation. "No." The single syllable hung in the air between us. Thaddeus stared at me as if I had suddenly started speaking a language he didn't understand. "What?" "No," I repeated. "I'm not interested in your investment opportunity." Color rose in his face. "Mother, you're not thinking clearly. This could secure the financial future of the entire family, including your grandchildren. My grandchildren have trust funds that will cover their education and provide substantial nest eggs. What they do beyond that is their responsibility, not mine." He took a step closer. "Is this about what you overheard at the party?" "Sybil and I were just talking. It didn't mean anything." So they had discussed it, decided on a strategy. Thaddeus would play the contrite son, smoothing over their callous words with reassurances that they were meaningless. "What I heard," I said evenly, "was the truth. You're waiting for me to die so you can claim what you believe is rightfully yours. But here's what you failed to understand, Thaddeus. Nothing is yours until I decide it is." His expression hardened, the mask of filial devotion slipping. "You're making a mistake. This investment could double your money in 18 months. Or it could disappear entirely. Either way, I'm not interested." "Is this because of Vienna? Sybil mentioned something about you conducting again." His tone made it clear how ridiculous he found the idea. "Mother, be realistic. You haven't conducted professionally in decades. This is clearly some sort of late-life crisis." I felt a surge of anger but kept my voice steady. "My professional decisions are not up for discussion. Neither are my financial ones. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting in 30 minutes. "This isn't over," he said, his tone verging on threatening. "Yes, Thaddeus, it is." After he left, slamming the door with enough force to rattle the crystal vase in the entryway, Zara looked at me with something approaching admiration. "Well done, Mrs. Ravenscroft." I smoothed down my jacket, aware that my hands were trembling slightly. "Schedule a meeting with my financial advisor, please. I want to move forward with establishing the foundation immediately." "Already done," she replied. "Mr. Harrington can see you tomorrow at 10. The next 3 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. I transferred a significant portion of my assets into the newly established Harmonic Ascendance Foundation. The foundation's mission, supporting female conductors and composers, was personal, but its potential impact extended far beyond my own grievances. Young women would receive the opportunities that had been denied to me without having to sacrifice their ambitions for someone else's glory. My preoperative appointments confirmed that I was an excellent candidate for the valve replacement. Dr. Morrison, a cardiac surgeon with 30 years of experience, expressed confidence in a full recovery. "You're in remarkable health for someone your age," he observed during our final consultation. "Strong heart muscle, good circulation, excellent lung function. The stenosis is the only significant issue." "I come from hardy stock," I told him. "My mother lived to 93. What I didn't say was how she had lived those years, diminished by my father's dominance, her own artistic talents relegated to church socials and ladies' luncheons. I had sworn I would never follow that path, yet somehow I had traveled it anyway, just on a grander scale. 2 days before my surgery, Sybil appeared at my apartment, her timing as strategic as ever. She arrived bearing flowers, lilies which she knew I disliked, and the practiced concern of someone performing grief for an audience. "Mother, you should have told us about your heart condition," she chided, arranging herself elegantly on my sofa. "We had to hear about your surgery from the symphony board of all people." "It wasn't relevant to you," I replied, accepting the tea Zara had prepared before discreetly withdrawing. "Not relevant? Your health is absolutely our concern." She leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Thaddeus and I want to help. We've been discussing moving you to a place with better care options after the surgery. The Beaumont has an excellent reputation." "The Beaumont is an assisted living facility. A luxury senior community," she corrected smoothly, "with medical staff on site. Given your condition—" "My condition," I interrupted, "will be addressed by the surgery, after which I'll be returning home to prepare for my engagement in Vienna." She sighed, the sound calculated to convey both patience and exasperation. "Mother, be reasonable. You can't possibly conduct a major orchestra after heart surgery, not at your age." Dr. Morrison disagrees, as does the Vienna Philharmonic. Sybil's perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together. "You've always been stubborn, but this is beyond stubborn. It's reckless. What are you trying to prove?" "That I exist beyond your perception of me," I thought, but did not say. "That my life has value beyond what you can inherit from it." "I'm not trying to prove anything," I said instead. "I'm simply living the life I choose." "And what about your responsibilities to the family, to the Ravenscroft name?" "I've spent 40 years honoring the Ravenscroft name. Now I'm honoring myself." She stood, smoothing her skirt with manicured hands that had never known real work. "Thaddeus and I are worried about you. Your behavior lately has been concerning." "How convenient that your concern coincides with my refusal to fund Thaddeus's latest venture." Color bloomed high on her cheekbones. "That's unfair. We care about your well-being." "Do you?" I asked quietly. "Or do you care about what my well-being means for you?" She gathered her designer handbag, her movements sharp with anger. "I can see this conversation is pointless. Call us when you're ready to be reasonable." After she left, I sat for a long time in the growing dusk, wondering what Magnus would think of this version of me, the woman who had finally found her voice after decades of careful silence. Would he be proud? Threatened? Most likely the latter. Our marriage had functioned best when I remained in his shadow. The night before my surgery, Ezra came to dinner, bringing not flowers, but a small jade plant in a handcrafted ceramic pot. "Something resilient," he explained. "Like you." We ate on the terrace, watching the sunset paint the Boston skyline in shades of gold and crimson. The conversation flowed easily between music, art, his latest projects, my preparations for Vienna. "I've been researching female conductors throughout history," I told him, describing the Foundation's first planned initiative, a documentary series highlighting women who had broken barriers in classical music. "It's remarkable how many have been erased from the narrative." "Including you," he observed. I paused, wine glass halfway to my lips. "I wasn't erased. I stepped aside voluntarily." "Did you?" The question lingered between us, challenging the story I had told myself for decades. Had it truly been a choice? Or had I been maneuvered into a corner so skillfully that the walls became invisible, leaving me to believe the cage was of my own making? "I made compromises," I said finally. "We all do. Some more than others." As the evening drew to a close, I found myself reluctant to see him leave. Ezra seemed to sense my hesitation. "I'll be there tomorrow," he said. "At the hospital, if you want me to be." "You don't have to do that." "I know." His eyes held mine. "I want to." The kiss we shared then was different from the chaste peck on the cheek at Tanglewood. This was a promise, an acknowledgement of possibilities that extended beyond tomorrow, beyond Vienna, into a future I was only beginning to imagine. After he left, I went to my piano one last time before the surgery. My fingers found the keys instinctively, playing Bach's Prelude in C major, the piece I had performed at my first recital, age 7, already showing the promise that would carry me to Juilliard and beyond. The simple, flowing arpeggios filled the room, each note distinct, yet part of a greater whole. Like a life, I thought. Individual moments that create a complete composition. For too long, my composition had been influenced by others. Magnus, societal expectations, the classical music establishment, even my children. Now at last, I was writing my own cadenza. I played until midnight, moving from Bach to Chopin to Debussy, pieces I had performed countless times, but never with such clarity of purpose. Each note was both a farewell to the person I had been and a greeting to the woman I was becoming. When I finally went to bed, I slept without dreams, secure in the knowledge that whatever happened on the operating table tomorrow, I had already begun my resurrection. Morning arrived, with soft spring light filtering through my curtains. Zara had stayed overnight in the guest room, ready to drive me to Massachusetts General for my 10 a.m. surgery. She helped me pack the small overnight bag I would need for my hospital stay, her efficiency as comforting as always. Mr. Thornfield called, she informed me as we prepared to leave. He'll meet us at the hospital. I nodded, unexpectedly moved by Ezra's reliability. It had been so long since I could count on someone's word. And your children? Ms. Sybil sent a text message wishing you well. She and Mr. Winston are in New York for an exhibition opening. Mr. Thaddeus hasn't responded to my notification about the surgery. I absorbed this information without surprise. It confirmed what I already knew. My children would express concern when it served their purposes, but not when it required actual sacrifice. The hospital corridor stretched before me, its sterile brightness a stark contrast to the warm tones of my apartment. As I was prepped for surgery, nurses attaching monitors and inserting IVs, I found myself thinking not of what I might lose, but of what I had already regained. My sense of self, my artistic purpose, the possibility of genuine connection. Ezra arrived as promised, his tall figure appearing in the doorway of my pre-op room, just as the anesthesiologist was explaining the procedure. "You made it," I said, extending my hand. He took it, his palm warm against mine. I said I would. Such a simple statement, yet it carried the weight of a vow. The anesthesiologist cleared her throat. "We'll be ready to move you to the operating room in about 10 minutes, Mrs. Ravenscroft." Maestro Ravenscroft, Ezra corrected gently. "She'll be conducting the Vienna Philharmonic this spring." The young doctor's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's impressive." "Yes," I agreed, squeezing Ezra's hand. "It is." As the medical team prepared to wheel me into surgery, I felt a strange sense of peace. The valve in my heart might be failing, but my spirit was stronger than it had been in years. Whatever happened next, I had already won the most important battle, the one for my own identity. The last thing I saw before the anesthesia took effect was Ezra's face, his expression a mixture of concern and confidence. Then darkness descended, carrying me toward whatever symphony awaited on the other side. I raised my baton. In that suspended moment, I thought of all that had led me here, the young conductor with limitless potential, the wife who stepped aside for her husband's career, the mother whose children valued her estate more than her essence, the woman who finally reclaimed her rightful place. The downbeat fell, and Beethoven's Seventh Symphony began. Life, energy, rhythm, joy, all flowing from my hands to their instruments, to the rapt audience. I conducted not just with my hands, but with my entire being, every gesture infused with emotional authenticity that can only come from having lived, lost, and found one's way back to the essential self. When the final triumphant A major chord resounded through the hall, there was a moment of absolute silence, that magical pause between the end of the performance and the beginning of the audience's response. Then came the applause, first a ripple, then a wave, then a storm. The audience rose to its feet, the ovation building as I acknowledged first the orchestra, section by section, before taking my own bow. Emerging from anesthesia is like conducting a symphony underwater. Sounds muffled, movements slowed. My first conscious thought was of Vienna, Beethoven's Seventh, floating through my mind. The second was the pain, a deep pressure in my chest. I forced my eyes open to find Ezra beside me, his face showing both concern and relief. "Welcome back," he said softly. The surgery had been successful. a bovine tissue valve now replacing my damaged one. Dr. Morrison was pleased with my recovery and confirmed I could conduct the Vienna Philharmonic in 3 months if I followed his rehabilitation protocol. Most people ask when they can drive again, Ezra remarked with a smile. Only you immediately ask about conducting a world-class orchestra. I've waited 40 years, I reminded him. I'm not waiting any longer. My children were conspicuously absent during my recovery, though Octavia sent wildflowers with a note. Hurry up and heal. Vienna awaits. On the 3rd day, Thaddeus finally appeared as I was struggling through my first walking session. He strode toward me in an expertly tailored suit, his expression a practiced blend of concern and authority. "Mother, you shouldn't be out of bed," he admonished, as if speaking to a wayward child. "Dr. Morrison disagrees," I replied, continuing my slow progress. After exchanging terse pleasantries, he got to the point. "I've been speaking with Harold Blackwell. He implied you've made significant alterations to your estate planning." "I have." His jaw tightened. "The foundation Zara registered. That's where you're putting the money. Some vanity project supporting female musicians." "The Harmonic Ascendance Foundation," I confirmed. "Supporting female conductors and composers is hardly a vanity project." "That money was meant to stay in the family," he insisted. "We'll contest it. We'll argue diminished capacity, undue influence. Your father built his career. I built mine. The fact that mine was interrupted doesn't make my assets any less mine to direct as I choose." "This isn't over, Mother," he said, as the nurse returned to escort me back to my room. "Yes, it is," I replied. "You just haven't accepted it yet." The confrontation left me drained but strangely liberated. There was clarity in acknowledging the truth of our relationship, not the polite fiction of devoted mother and son, but two people connected by blood, yet divided by values. Recovery progressed with the predictable patterns of physical healing. What surprised me was the parallel emotional recovery, a shedding of constraints that had bound me far more effectively than any surgical restrictions. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from Sybil, not a visit, but a formal letter warning about the potential consequences of my hasty decisions. Like her brother, she threatened legal action while couching it in terms of concern for my well-being. With Katerina, my physical therapist, I gradually rebuilt my strength. By 6 weeks, I could conduct simple patterns without pain. By 8 weeks, I could work through a complete movement of Beethoven's 7th. Throughout this period, Ezra remained a steady presence, not hovering, but available. He mentioned casually one evening that he'd been invited to design a garden in Vienna coinciding with my concert series. The coincidence made us both smile. 12 weeks post-surgery, we flew to Vienna, Ezra beside me, Zara across the aisle organizing my schedule. Standing in my apartment that evening, looking out at a city steeped in musical history, I felt a momentary flash of doubt. "Having second thoughts?" Ezra asked. "Momentary vertigo," I admitted. "The view from the podium can be dizzying." He placed his hand on my shoulder. "Remember what you told me about Mahler? That the conductor must embrace both the terror and ecstasy of the infinite." The Musikverein's golden hall gleamed with gilded carvings as I entered the following morning. The orchestra regarded me with polite but reserved assessment, part curiosity, part skepticism. The first downbeat was a moment of truth. The opening. A major chord resonated through the hall, precise but cautious. At the vivace, I set a tempo slightly more urgent than conventional. There was a moment of adjustment. Then, remarkably, they locked in. By the time we reached the development section, something had shifted. The orchestra was no longer merely following. They were engaging, responding to the narrative I was shaping. 1 week before the first performance, I encountered Sybil in the lobby. Immaculate in a designer suit, her expression carefully neutral. "Mother," she said, "I thought perhaps we could have lunch." At a nearby cafe, she maintained polite conversation until dessert arrived. Then I cut through the charade. "Why are you really here, Sybil?" Her perfect composure slipped slightly. "Candor might be best. Your public return to conducting has complicated matters. The press coverage has been extensive. Challenging the will of Cordelia Ravenscroft, former recluse, would have been one thing. Challenging the will of Maestro Ravenscroft, triumphant conductor of the Vienna Philharmonic, is quite another. So this wasn't reconciliation, but strategic repositioning. They had calculated the public relations impact of fighting a woman who had become a symbol of late-life renaissance, and found it wanting. I see. So this is a pragmatic retreat, not a change of heart. Does it matter? The result is the same. We won't contest your will. It matters to me. But I appreciate your honesty, belated though it may be. The night of the premiere arrived with electric anticipation. I wore black, as conductors traditionally do, but with a subtle difference. A crimson silk scarf at my throat, a flash of color against the austere background. Ezra knocked gently before entering my dressing room. "It's a full house," he reported, "and the orchestra is in fine form." He surprised me by taking my hand. "Cordelia, whatever happens tonight, remember this: you've already won." The simple truth of his words steadied me. I had already won. Not just the battle with my children over my estate, but the more profound struggle to reclaim my identity. I stepped onto the podium to polite but enthusiastic applause. The faces before me, musicians ready to follow or resist depending on what they experienced, waited expectantly. Behind them, an audience of strangers and a handful of people who thought they knew me prepared to render judgment. I raised my baton. In that suspended moment between preparation and action, I thought of all that had led me here. The young conductor with limitless potential, the wife who stepped aside for her husband's career, the mother whose children valued her estate more than her essence, the woman who finally, at 67, reclaimed her rightful place. The downbeat fell, and Beethoven's Seventh Symphony began. Life, energy, rhythm, joy, all flowing from my hands to their instruments, to the rapt audience. The music spoke what words never could, of resilience, of passion deferred but never extinguished, of the transcendent power of artistic truth. I conducted not just with my hands but with my entire being, every gesture infused with the emotional authenticity that can only come from having lived, lost, and found one's way back to the essential self. The orchestra responded in kind, their initial skepticism transformed into collaborative brilliance. When the final triumphant, a major chord of the fourth movement resounded through the hall, there was a moment of absolute silence, that magical pause between the end of the performance and the beginning of the audience's response, when the music seems to hover in the air, unwilling to release its hold on the collective consciousness. Then came the applause. First a ripple, then a wave, then a storm. The audience rose to its feet, the ovation building in intensity as I acknowledged first the orchestra, section by section, before finally taking my own bow. In that moment of acclamation, I wasn't thinking of Magnus, or Thaddeus, or Sybil, or even the foundation that would carry my musical values into the future. I was fully present, experiencing the perfect synthesis of preparation and spontaneity, of technical mastery and emotional truth that defines great musical performance. Later, at the reception, I received congratulations from critics, patrons, fellow musicians. Ezra remained at my side, his quiet pride more meaningful than the effusive praise of strangers. Zara efficiently managed the flow of well-wishers, ensuring I didn't overtax my still-recovering strength. Octavia, who had flown in for the performance, embraced me with uncharacteristic emotion. "You've done it," she whispered. "Everything we dreamed of when we were young women." I spotted Sybil across the room, watching from a distance, her expression unreadable. Our eyes met briefly before she turned away, disappearing into the crowd. I felt no triumph in her retreat, only a wistful acknowledgement of what might have been had our relationship been built on genuine connection rather than obligation. The reviews the following day were overwhelmingly positive, with even the notoriously critical Viennese press acknowledging the unusual power of the performance. Maestro Ravenscroft conducts Beethoven not as a museum piece, but as a living, breathing entity, wrote one reviewer. One wonders what the musical world has missed during her decades of silence. Over the following weeks, I conducted the remaining performances with growing confidence, each one building on the success of the last. Invitations began arriving from other orchestras, Berlin, Amsterdam, London, all eager to feature the conductor whose late career renaissance had captured the classical music world's imagination. I accepted some, declined others, making choices based not on prestige or expectation, but on what would bring me genuine fulfillment. The Harmonic Ascendance Foundation began its work, identifying promising female conductors and composers for mentorship and financial support. I took particular satisfaction in knowing that young women would have opportunities that had been denied to me, and so many of my contemporaries. Ezra's garden project concluded around the same time as my Vienna residency, its design reflecting the same principles he had described to me months earlier: the importance of space, of silence, of balance between structure and organic growth. Standing among the peaceful plantings, watching patients from the hospital find moments of tranquility, I recognized a parallel to my own journey. "What happens now?" he asked as we prepared to return to Boston. "More conducting, teaching, the foundation?" I considered the question, recognizing its deeper meaning. What happens now between us? What future might we build together? "All of the above," I replied, taking his hand. But not just that. His smile told me he understood. The return to Boston brought practical matters back into focus: the ongoing administration of my estate, the foundation's development, the careful monitoring of my heart's continued recovery. Thaddeus made one final attempt to persuade me to invest in his venture, presenting revised terms that he claimed addressed my concerns. I declined politely, but firmly, suggesting he seek funding from conventional sources. Sybil maintained the pretense established in Vienna, sending appropriate holiday greetings and occasional updates about her children, but never attempting genuine reconciliation. I responded in kind, recognizing that some relationships cannot be transformed, only managed. As autumn deepened toward winter, I began preparations for my next conducting engagement, a series with the Berlin Philharmonic that held particular significance. It was the orchestra I had been invited to join 40 years earlier, the opportunity I had relinquished for Magnus's career. The symmetry was not lost on me. One evening, as snowflakes began to dust the Boston Public Garden, I sat at my piano, playing not a classical piece, but a simple improvisation, allowing my fingers to follow their own path. Ezra listened from the doorway, his expression thoughtful. "You know," he said when I finished, "there's a theory in Japanese garden design about the concept of borrowed scenery, incorporating distant landscape elements into the garden's composition. How does that apply to music?" I asked, curious as always about the connections he drew between our different art forms. "It's not about music." He joined me on the piano bench. "It's about life, your life. You've reclaimed what was borrowed from you, your talent, your identity, your future." I considered this, thinking of the journey from my birthday party where I'd overheard my children's cruel toast to this moment of peaceful contentment. "Not borrowed," I corrected gently. "Stolen. But yes, reclaimed." He nodded, acknowledging the distinction. "The question is, what will you compose with what remains?" The answer came to me with unexpected clarity. Something authentic, something that honors both the time lost and the time remaining. Something entirely my own. As snow continued to fall outside, transforming the familiar landscape into something new and unexplored, I began to play again. This time, a melody I had composed in my youth but never developed. Ezra listened, his presence a counterpoint to the solitude that had defined so much of my life. The heart in my chest, surgically repaired but fundamentally my own, beat with a steady rhythm, keeping time for whatever symphony I chose to create next. If you want to hear more stories of resilience and reclaimed power, subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell. Leave a comment below sharing what resonated with you most about my journey from silence to strength.